have been in the Thunder Mountain 4-H Club for 8 years, and this is my 8th year presenting. Injury to the site may be the result of common things such as hard racetracks and or uneven surfaces. So as you can imagine, when the horses are running around, if they don't have the surface completely flat, or if it's too packed down, if they don't drag it correctly, that would be what would cause a hoof crack for a thoroughbred or a racehorse, because when their hoof comes down on it, it can just split because they don't have the right footing. This also can be pretty common in jumping if the same type of thing isn't done to the ring beforehand, where it's a good landing for the horse because all the weight comes down on that too. Quarter cracks originate from the cornet and run down the hoof wall, rather than a sand crack that begins at the ground surface and runs up the hoof wall. Hoof cracks force 2% of racehorses to retire. So I have a picture of a sand crack here, which shows it started at the bottom and then it's traveling up the hoof wall and causing a crack. So the last system I will be talking about is the cardiovascular system, which consists of the heart and the lungs. I'll be talking about an aortic aneurysm, which is one of the most common problems that racehorses or thoroughbreds accumulate from their training and or competitions. So an aortic aneurysm is horses that appear healthy but also then suddenly collapse and die have had an aortic aneurysm most likely. So the horse will appear perfectly healthy before, if you don't examine it closely enough, and it just will end up being dead. People are like, what happened to my horse? So what most likely happened is the aorta, which is a large blood vessel that carries oxygenated blood from the heart to the rest of the body, which is just one of the biggest parts and most important parts of the heart for humans and most other animals. It's normally very tough and strong, and the walls of the aorta can develop, a thin area that causes the rupture, resulting in severe internal bleeding, which is why you can't necessarily detect internal bleeding when your horse looks healthy, but that's why it causes death. The reason it's not protected during routine examinations, like it says there, is there's no way to predict these sudden events and deaths. Commonly reported as an equine heart attack, aortic rupture is in no way similar to the human malady of that name. So this type is not similar to a horse heart attack or an equine heart attack, but when someone refers to an equine heart attack, they're referring to an aortic aneurysm. So, famous racehorses with these injuries. I don't know, many of you guys have heard of Seabiscuit, so I'll start with him. He suffered from a ruptured tendon, which did not end his racing career. He wanted to come back from that, but he fortunately did, and I have him there on that table for you guys to look at, and a picture of him right here. He's a very well-known racehorse. So he had a non-fatal injury and was able to come back from it. So in 1975, there was a horse named Ruffian, who is in the Hall of Fame for fillies, and as well as this other horse, Barbaro, who sustained his injury in 2006. So they're often compared because they had the same injury but on different legs. They both suffered from a skeletal fracture, which is often referred to as a breakdown. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the racehorse broke down, but they're often referring to skeletal fractures. And both injuries led to the horse's death, unfortunately. Ruffian actually also suffered a burst splint early in her career, but what actually ultimately killed her is her skeletal fracture, which happened in her right foreleg, and it snapped during a race. And she didn't have as good of equine hospitals then, but they tried to save her. You can save your horse from this, but it's extremely hard. She ended up breaking her other leg in surgery and she died. But Barbaro actually lived for several months after. The person who owns where I got my horse from actually was the vet for him, so it's pretty interesting. And yeah, he died a couple months later because he had all his weight on his other good legs, which caused laminitis, which is also a common side effect of some of the racetrack injuries, and he ended up having to be euthanized. And this is a picture of his X-ray of his leg, which you can see that it's completely shattered pretty much. I have a video of Ruffian's breakdown, but it's kind of graphic, so I think I'm not going to show it. So, or apparently I am. Yeah. I don't know if you guys kind of are squeamish, you might not want to watch it, but... I'll tell you. It just shows what happens. The horse often, unfortunately, has to keep running after they break down, which is what I wanted to show you guys with this video, that the horse is going so fast that they can barely stop, and they keep running on the injured leg, which injures it further. So that's the problem with a racetrack breakdown, is it injures the horse even more, and it just is really horrible. So Ruffian, the horse that is going to break down, is on the inside, and this was a match race in 1975, also referred to as the Battle of the Sexes, where she was racing the Kentucky Derby winner Foolish Pleasure, who was on the outside. And yeah, you can see that horse breaks down. You can't see too closely what actually happens to the leg, which I didn't really want to show because it's pretty nasty. But as you can see, unfortunately, she has to keep running after the breakdown because she's going so fast that it's almost impossible for her to completely stop afterwards. So solutions to this problem of all these common racetrack injuries are, so one of the main causes, in my opinion, of these issues is starting thoroughbreds at a later age would fix this, because a lot of thoroughbreds get started at 2-year-olds, which I have mentioned throughout my presentation, which when their bones, joints, ligaments, etc. are nowhere near done growing. If the starting age for racing was pushed back even just a year, many of these injuries could be prevented. Another option is more intense pre-race vet checks after the death of Ruffian more intense pre-race vet checks would help quite a bit. After the death of Ruffian, which is the horse you guys saw a minute ago, vet checks became more mandatory, but they aren't as extensive as I personally believe that they should be, which would help a lot of the problems. So yeah, this is a picture of Barbaro, which is one of the other horses I talked about, who had a breakdown in 2006. And as I was talking about earlier, that why racetrack injuries matter is that, as you can see, he has to be held up by a sling. He's completely bandaged on his other leg, has to have wraps on all the other legs to help sustain this, help support him, because of his other leg not being able to be stood on. And it just is, they never quite go back to how they were before after some of these injuries. So in conclusion, I have taught you about why racetrack injuries matter, the biological systems and the percentages of related fatal injuries, categories of the injuries, musculoskeletal system, respiratory system, involuntary system, and the cardiovascular system. Common injuries with the categories such as skeletal fractures, buctions, splints, luxations, ossolates, carpitis, ruptured tendons, tendinitis, desmitis, and exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, hoof cracks, and aortic aneurysms. I have also taught you guys about some famous horses who have been affected by these injuries and solutions to help prevent these injuries. These are my sources. I can't really pronounce some of them, but just a couple equine news. I actually got some of my information from a retired thoroughbred relocating program. They have a lot of really good information on some of the injuries that are sustained throughout racetracks. It's called New Vocations. My name is Tamara.SE, and I taught you guys about racetrack injuries and the causes, preventions, etc. And I've been in the Thermon 4-H Riders for 8 years. That's all I have.